In the previous video, Lucas Mitchell, a billionaire disguised as a guest, met Hayley, a chambermaid determined to change her life. What began as simple curiosity soon turned into something deeper, as secrets about the hotel's management came to light. Between encounters, challenges, and discoveries, the two grew closer and closer until a special dinner sealed their connection. Now what comes next? Is this love ready to face what lies ahead? The Miami Beach night breeze was still blowing gently as Lucas and Hayley stood there on the sand after the kiss that had changed everything. Neither of them seemed to want to leave that moment. Hayley's heart was racing, still trying to process what had just happened. Lucas, on the other hand, looked at her with a mixture of tenderness and certainty. He held her hand gently, entwining his fingers in hers, as if to say without words that he wasn't going anywhere. Hayley lowered her eyes to their intertwined hands and smiled slightly, feeling a strange sense of security. "What's wrong?" Lucas asked, his voice low and soft. "Nothing," she sighed, looking out to sea. "I'm just trying to understand how all this happened." Lucas squeezed her hand lightly. "Sometimes the best things in life happen when you least expect them." Hayley laughed lightly and shook her head. "I never imagined that a hotel guest would change my life so much." Lucas looked her in the eye, and his tone became more serious. "I never imagined that coming to Miami would change mine so much." His intense gaze made her hold her breath for a moment. She wasn't used to someone looking at her like that, as if she were important, as if she were unique. Hayley looked away, feeling her cheeks heat up. "I should go. I have to get up early for work tomorrow." Lucas didn't want the night to end, but he nodded slowly. "I'll drive you." "You don't have to. I'll take the bus." "Hayley, I'm not going to let you take a bus at this time of night." She hesitated but didn't argue. The truth was that she wanted to spend a few more minutes by his side. The two of them walked to Lucas's car, and the journey was silent but comfortable. Hayley stared out of the window, thinking about everything that was happening, while Lucas drove, occasionally casting discreet glances at her. When they reached the small building where Hayley lived, she hesitated before getting out. "Thanks for dinner." "And the ride." Lucas smiled. "Thanks for the kiss." Hayley felt her face heat up and quickly opened the door. "Good night, Lucas." He laughed softly. "Good night, Hayley." She entered the building without looking back, but Lucas stood there for a moment watching the entrance. He knew that this woman had changed his life, but was he ready for everything that was to follow? He would only find out in time. When Hayley arrived at the hotel the next morning and began her work routine, she felt her heart racing as she approached room 512. But when he opened the door, he found the space empty. The suitcases were gone. The guest had already checked out. She stood still for a few seconds, trying to process what she was seeing, or rather what she couldn't see. The room was spotless, as if he had never been there. A cold sensation ran through her chest. For a moment, he wondered if it had all just been a dream. The dinner, the conversation, the kiss, had it been real? Her heart squeezed as a nagging thought took hold of her mind. How could someone like him like someone like her? Ever since she was a child, Hayley had learned not to expect too much from life. Love had never been something that belonged to her. She grew up in a home where she was just another weight, a burden, someone who was never enough. Her parents never showed affection. Hugs were cold. Their words always carried more criticism than encouragement. Over time, she accepted that she wasn't worthy of love, and perhaps now she was reliving it. Lucas was too good to be true, and maybe that's exactly what it was, just a beautiful dream that ended before it began. Swallowing the lump in her throat, Hayley forced herself to keep working. There was no time for illusions. The day dragged by. Every time her cell phone vibrated in her apron pocket, her heart raced for a second, only to be disappointed when she saw that it wasn't him. Until, at the end of the day, when she had given up waiting, the phone rang. She took her cell phone out of her pocket with trembling fingers and felt a chill when she saw his name on the screen. Lucas Mitchell. Her chest tightened as she opened the message. "Hayley, I had to leave to take care of something important, but I really need to talk to you. Can we meet tomorrow? It's something serious." She read the message 3 times, trying to decipher the tone of the words. Something serious? What did he mean by that? For a moment, her mind wandered to all the possibilities. What if he was married? No. Lucas didn't seem like that kind of man. But then, why leave so suddenly? Why had he made it seem like he'd left without saying anything? She felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. He still wanted to see her. But what did he have to say? She wanted to believe it was something good. But a part of her, that part that always expected to be rejected, feared the worst. She took a deep breath before replying with a simple, "Okay." And then the night seemed to last forever. Hayley arrived at the hotel early the next morning. She had a lot of work to do, but her mind was stuck on that night's meeting. As she passed through the corridor on the 5th floor, she stopped briefly in front of the door to room 512. The door opened, and an elderly woman came out with a polite smile, followed by a man who appeared to be her son. Hayley took a step back, realizing that the room was already occupied by new guests. For a moment, she felt a pang in her chest. That place which, until the day before, had been the space where it all began between her and Lucas, now belonged to other people. Life took its course, regardless of the memories it left behind. She took a deep breath and pushed those thoughts away. She needed to concentrate on her work. The morning passed between changed sheets, clean bathrooms, and long corridors. But even though she was busy, her heart was racing to know what Lucas had to say that evening. What did he want to talk about? Why had he used the word serious? When she went down to the storeroom to get a blanket that was missing from her trolley, she heard rustling in the corridor. Housekeepers were whispering to each other, looking surprised and excited. "I can't believe it's finally happened." It went straight from the management room to the street. And so did he. Hayley frowned, not understanding. When she entered the control room to get the blanket, the scene she encountered made her stop in mid-stride. Her boss was there, collecting her belongings with haste and visible irritation. "This is absurd, after years here, to be treated like this, as if I'm just anyone," the woman grumbled to herself, shoving her belongings into a box. Then she left the room angrily, with hurried steps, without looking at anyone. Hayley stood still, trying to understand what had just happened. Then she bumped into a fellow chambermaid in the corridor and asked, "What's going on?" The other employee looked at her in surprise. "Haven't you heard? The housekeeper and the director have been fired." Hayley froze. "What? What do you mean? What do you mean?" The hotel owner found out about them. It seems they were using their position to take advantage of the place, abandoning their responsibilities. Hayley's heart raced. Lucas. She knew she had told him about the housekeeper and the director. He had heard her. A part of her felt guilty. She knew that conversation had contributed to the decision to fire them both, but at the same time, she couldn't ignore the fact that the hotel was suffering because of them. The Blue Haven's reputation had fallen dramatically, the staff were overworked, and the guests were dissatisfied. If Lucas was really the owner, he had to act. And he did. Hayley returned to finish her work, her chest tight with this new discovery, and even more curious about what he wanted to talk about that evening. In the afternoon, she asked a colleague to look after the dog walks for her. "Are you going to miss today?" her friend asked in surprise. "I have an important dinner." She felt the weight of those words. It was more than dinner. Her college class would also be another day. This time, she had to be there to hear what Lucas had to say. The sun had already started to set when Hayley arrived home and began to get ready. She wanted to look her best for the moment. She chose a simple but pretty dress in a burgundy shade that highlighted her skin. She let her hair down, letting it fall in soft waves over her shoulders. She applied a light lipstick and before leaving looked in the mirror. She felt a chill in her stomach. What did Lucas want to talk about? Would it be something good, something bad? What if he said that what had happened between them was a mistake? She pushed these thoughts aside and picked up her bag. It was too late to turn back. She walked slowly down the stairs, and when she stepped out onto the street, he was there. Lucas leaning against his car, waiting for her. And when their gazes met, everything around them seemed to disappear. Her heart beat faster. He opened the car door for her and smiled. "Ready?" Hayley took a deep breath, trying to ignore her nervousness. "Ready." She got into the car and Lucas closed the door, turning around to get into the driver's seat. He started the car, and the two of them drove down Miami's brightly lit avenue. Hayley stared out of the window at the city, trying to find words, but it was Lucas who seemed to hesitate this time. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, but it carried something intense. After a few minutes, he broke the silence. "I know you're probably wondering what I want to talk about." Haley turned to him, waiting. Lucas squeezed the steering wheel slightly, as if gathering his courage. "I want to talk about us." Haley held her breath. The car moved on and Lucas kept his eyes on the road. "I know we've only known each other a short time, but you've changed something in me, Haley." She felt a shiver run across her skin. "Lucas," he smiled, "I know it may sound crazy, but I feel that what we have here is real, and I don't want it to end." She looked away for a moment. "I don't want it to either." Lucas looked at her quickly, as if those words were all he needed to hear. But before he could say anything else, Lucas's phone vibrated. Haley watched as he picked up his cell phone and glanced quickly at the screen. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes closed for a moment. He picked up. "I can't talk now. I'll call you back later." The answer was short and to the point, and then he hung up without further explanation. Haley felt an uncomfortable twinge in her chest. Who had called? He seemed calm, as if it was no big deal. But what if it was? What if he really was married? What if all this closeness was just a game to him? Haley hated to think like that, but after everything she'd been through in her life, she couldn't help it. She had always learned that good things came with a price. What if this time the price was discovering that she was falling in love with someone who already belonged to someone else? Doubt grew inside her until, before she could stop herself, the words escaped her mouth. "Are you married?" Lucas turned his face to her, surprised. "What? If that's what you want to tell me at dinner, you can say it now." He was silent for a moment. Then, to her surprise, he started laughing. "Married?" She crossed her arms, still suspicious. Lucas kept his eyes on the road, but the smile on his face was evident. "At the restaurant, we'll talk about everything properly. I promise." Haley couldn't tell if this reassured her or made her even more anxious, but something inside her told her that that night would change everything. Lucas parked the car in front of the waterfront restaurant, one of the most sophisticated in Miami. The soft lighting reflected off the calm waters, and the sound of the waves gently breaking on the sand created an intimate atmosphere. Haley looked around, feeling a mixture of nervousness and curiosity. Lucas got out first, walked around the car, and opened the door for her. Haley hesitated for a second before accepting his hand to get out. The touch was firm and secure, and for a moment she found herself enjoying the feeling. The two of them entered the restaurant and were led to a reserved table in a more discreet corner. Lucas seemed comfortable there, as if he was used to this kind of environment, while Haley still felt a little out of place. When they sat down, he took a deep breath and looked directly at her. "I imagine you already know that I fired the hotel's director and head of housekeeping." Haley blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected the subject to come up so quickly. "Yes." Everyone in the hotel was talking about it. It was a shock. Lucas nodded. It shouldn't have been. They were letting the hotel drift while they took advantage of their position. I had to take action. Haley ran her fingers along the rim of the glass of water in front of her. "I'm not going to lie. When I heard about the resignation, I thought that, in a way, I was the one who put that information into your head." Lucas arched an eyebrow. "You just told me the truth, Haley." "I already suspected it, but I had no proof. You helped me see what was really going on." She let out a relieved sigh. "Even so, it's strange to think that my words had such an impact." Lucas watched her for a moment, then smiled slightly. "You have more power than you realize." Haley felt a shiver run across her skin, but looked away before he realized the effect those words had had on her. The food arrived, and for a few minutes they both concentrated on dinner. Haley, however, still couldn't fully understand why Lucas had called her there. Did he just want to talk about the hotel, or was there something more? Lucas put the cutlery away and looked at her again. This time, his countenance seemed more serious. "I have to go home soon." Haley felt a tightness in her chest at those words, but kept her expression neutral. "To New York?" He nodded. "Yes, my family and my business are there." But before I go, I have something to tell you. Haley put down her cutlery and straightened up in her chair. What is it? Lucas hesitated for a moment, as if he wasn't sure how to say what he wanted. I really don't know what the best decision is. Haley frowned. Lucas, you're making me nervous. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say anything, his phone vibrated again. Lucas picked it up, looked at the screen, and let out a sigh. It was the same person as before. I'll get back to you. Just give me a little more time. Be patient. He hung up quickly and ran his hands over his face, visibly frustrated. Haley watched his expression, puzzled. Who was that? Lucas looked at her, as if pondering whether or not to tell her. After a moment's silence, he finally said, The head of HR. Haley blinked. From the hotel? He nodded. He's interviewing people for the management and governance vacancy, but he needs to make a decision soon, because the hotel is short of people at the moment. She felt her heart racing, but tried to look indifferent. And shouldn't you be sorting this out? Lucas held her gaze for a moment before answering. I'll call him after we get out of here. First, I want to finish this conversation with you. Haley didn't know how to interpret those words. On the one hand, it was strange to think that he was putting off something so important just to be there with her. But on the other hand, was it possible that he really cared that much about this moment? Her heart was pounding, eager to know what else he had to say. Haley felt her breathing falter, and then he spoke. I want you to take over as head of governance at Blue Haven. She blinked a few times, trying to absorb the words she had just heard. Lucas watched her intently, waiting for her reaction, but even he couldn't predict what was going on inside her at that moment. You want me to? What? Her voice came out low, almost a whisper. Lucas smiled slightly, realizing that she was completely stunned. I want you to take over as head of governance at Blue Haven. Haley choked on her own saliva and had to put her hand to her chest, trying to catch her breath. That wasn't in the plans. It was never in the plans. She thought he wanted to tell her something about the hotel, maybe even say goodbye. But to hear that? Lucas continued, his voice full of sincerity. You know the hotel better than anyone, Haley. You're hard-working, dedicated, you know how things really work. No one would be more qualified for this position than you. Haley was still trying to process everything when he continued, but this time his words changed everything. But if you accept the position, anyway, I have to go back to New York tomorrow, and I didn't want to leave you here. Her chest tightened. He looked at her deeply, and his expression was that of someone fighting something bigger than he could control. I wanted to take you with me. Haley felt her heart race. Take you to New York? Lucas nodded. Yes. You would spend time with me there. Time for us to date, get to know each other better, and maybe even get married. Those words hit her like a shock. She'd never imagined hearing something like that, not from someone like him. And for the first time in her life, Haley realized how difficult it can be to choose when you have everything. Because for the first time, the world was giving her options. Lucas was offering her two paths. The first, to stay in Miami and accept the position that would transform her professional life forever. The second, to go to New York and dive headfirst into the feeling that was growing between the two of them, to experience something that she had never thought possible for someone like her. She looked at Lucas, who was now silent, just waiting. Her eyes filled with tears. It was too much. It was all at once. I don't know what to say. Lucas leaned forward, lowering his head a little, as if he wanted to find her in the middle of that whirlwind of emotions. I know it's a lot, Haley, but I need to be honest with you. She looked away, tears streaming silently down her face. Lucas stood up, pulled out the chair next to her, and knelt down. He took her hands between his and looked directly into her eyes. I don't want to be without you. Haley felt her heart stop for a second. Lucas squeezed her hands tighter. But if you need to continue your life here, I'll do everything I can to help you and wait for the right time for us to be together. I know that time will come. The tears fell harder. Nobody ever put her first like that. No one had ever said they would be willing to wait for her. Unable to hold back the emotion, she leaned forward, and Lucas pulled her into his arms. The embrace was tight, as if neither of them wanted to let go of the other. Haley closed her eyes and felt his scent, the security of his arms, the warmth of a body that seemed designed to protect her. And then, without having to say another word, their lips met. The kiss began softly, as if they were both absorbing everything that this moment meant. But then Lucas pulled her closer, deepening the kiss, making it clear what he felt, what he wanted, what he was willing to wait for. And Haley knew. No matter what choice she made, Lucas would be there, and that was just the beginning. They walked away slowly, their faces still close, as if they were afraid of breaking the moment. Lucas's gaze was filled with tenderness, and Haley felt her heart racing in her chest. Nothing had ever seemed so right and so frightening at the same time. It was then that Haley blinked a few times and looked around, realizing that they were still in the restaurant. A few people were casting discreet glances, and a waiter was trying to pretend he wasn't watching the scene as he served the next table. She brought one of her hands to her face, laughing softly. "I think we've forgotten where we are." Lucas smiled and ran a hand through his hair, a little embarrassed but with no regrets. "Definitely. But you know what? I don't regret it one bit." Haley smiled, feeling lighter. The atmosphere that had seemed tense before was now different, more comfortable, more right. Dinner ended, and as they left the restaurant, they decided to walk along the promenade. The warm Miami breeze enveloped them both, and the waves breaking on the sand created a peaceful background sound. After a few minutes of comfortable silence, Haley stopped and looked out at the ocean, as if trying to organize her thoughts. "I want to stay in Miami." Lucas frowned and looked at her. "Really?" She nodded slowly, then turned to him. "But that doesn't mean I don't want to live a life with you." Lucas remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "I want to show you all the dedication I'll have to Blue Haven. I want to take care of the hotel as if it were my own, because now, in a way, it's my boyfriend's hotel. I want to make people talk about it with pride again, like they used to." Lucas watched her, impressed. She didn't just want a job, she wanted to build something. "You already know what you need to do." He smiled, taking her hand. "And I know you're going to transform that hotel." Haley smiled back, but before she could reply, Lucas gently pulled her close. "But what about me?" he asked, his voice low and full of emotion. "How am I going to cope without you?" She bit her lip, looking at him. It was difficult, very difficult. But then, before she could think too much, she made her decision. "Come with me." Lucas frowned. "Where to?" She squeezed his hand. "To my house." Lucas's heart raced. "Are you sure?" Haley smiled and nodded. They walked together to Haley's small apartment, which was just a few blocks away. It was simple but cozy, and Lucas realized that this place reflected who she was. As soon as they entered, Lucas pulled her in for a kiss. But this time, there was no rush. It was just them. It was a night of love, of surrender, of discovery, a night in which they were both sure that they belonged together. The next morning, the first ray of sunshine broke through the curtain of the small apartment. Haley woke up slowly, feeling Lucas's presence beside her. He was sleeping peacefully, and for a moment she just watched him. It was hard to believe that all this was happening, but she couldn't let herself get carried away by the moment. She had a new job to take on. She got up slowly so as not to wake him, showered and put on more formal clothes than usual. It was her first day as head of governance at Blue Haven. Before leaving, she stopped beside the bed and looked at Lucas one more time. He didn't want to say goodbye, but then, as if he sensed his presence, he opened his eyes. Lucas smiled sleepily. "Are you leaving already?" Haley nodded. "I have to go. First day." Lucas sighed and sat up in bed. "I wanted you to come back to New York with me." She smiled and stroked his cheek. I know, but we'll manage." Lucas held her hand. "I want you so much, Haley." She felt her chest warm up. "So do I." "Be sure." They kissed one last time before she walked out the door. When Haley arrived at the hotel, everything seemed different. The looks on the faces of the chambermaids, the receptionists and the staff. Now, she was the boss. She took a deep breath and entered the HR room. It was time to start her new life. Meanwhile, Lucas was getting ready for the airport. His flight to New York was leaving in a few hours, and for the first time, He didn't want to go, but he knew he would be back, because he would never be away from Hayley for long. The days passed like a hurricane in Hayley's life. From the moment she took over, she plunged headlong into her work, determined to transform the housekeeping department and, consequently, the guest experience at Blue Haven. She reorganized the team, distributed duties fairly, and ensured that no one was overburdened. The difference was visible. For the first time in a long time, the staff were motivated, working in harmony. But Hayley didn't limit herself to her sector. She wanted more. She started collaborating with managers in other areas, suggesting changes that could improve service and the quality of the hotel as a whole. From small adjustments to the cleanliness of the corridors to a new communication system between employees, everything began to fall into place. The results came quickly. Guests started praising the hotel again. Online reviews, previously full of complaints, were now full of positive comments. Bookings increased, and above all, the staff were happy to finally be working in a fair environment. Hayley was proud of what she was doing, but there was an emptiness inside her. Lucas. They spoke every day through messages, phone calls, and video calls, but as much as they saw each other on their cell phones, it wasn't enough. She wanted to be with him. And every day Lucas made it clearer that he felt the same way. 15 days had passed since he left, but that weekend he would be back. Hayley counted down the hours. When Saturday finally arrived, she left the hotel in the middle of the afternoon and drove to the airport, feeling her heart race with every kilometer she approached. Standing in the arrivals area, she looked anxiously at each person who passed through the glass gate. And then she saw him. Lucas was walking towards her, tall, confident, wearing a white shirt and jeans, making no effort to look sophisticated. But he was still the most incredible man she had ever seen. Their gazes met, and Hayley forgot everything around her. She ran to him. Lucas dropped his suitcase on the floor and pulled her into his arms before she could say anything. The kiss was intense, full of longing, desire, and relief. They were finally together again. "I've missed you so much," Lucas murmured against her lips. "Me too." He held her tightly as if he never wanted to let her go. The world around them disappeared, but eventually they had to get out of there. Lucas picked up his suitcase and, still holding hands with Hayley, they left the airport for the restaurant where they would have lunch. On the way, he kept looking at her. "You look different." She frowned, puzzled. "How different?" "More confident, more secure. You've always had it in you, but now you're letting everyone see it." Hayley smiled, looking away. "I think it's because, for the first time, I'm doing something I really love." Lucas took her hand and kissed it lightly. "And you're doing it better than anyone else could." When they arrived at the restaurant, they sat at a table near the terrace from where they could see the ocean. Lucas took a glass of water and looked at her with a satisfied smile. "I'm already hearing about the compliments from the guests." Hayley arched an eyebrow. "Is that right?" He nodded. "Did you really think I wouldn't keep an eye out? I read every review, every comment. The hotel is going back to the way it always was." She smiled, happy that he had noticed. But Lucas turned serious for a moment and held her hand over the table. "Thank you, Hayley. You have no idea how much this means to me." She felt her chest warm. "I'm just doing what I think is right." Lucas nodded. "You're doing a lot more than that." The waiter arrived with their plates and they began to eat, but something still hung in the air. There was something that needed to be said. Lucas wiped his mouth with his napkin and looked at Hayley with a more serious expression. "But I want more." Hayley frowned. "More?" Lucas leaned his arms on the table and sighed. "I don't want to be away from you, Hayley." She felt her heart squeeze. "Lucas, we need to sort this out." He squeezed her hand lightly. "It's not right for us to be apart like this. I love you. And as much as I know you're building something incredible here, I need you by my side." The silence that had settled between them was interrupted when Lucas stopped walking. He took a deep breath as if he was about to do something that would change his life forever. Hayley felt a chill in her stomach as she saw him hold her hands and look into her eyes with an intensity that made her hold her breath. "Hayley, I can't live away from you anymore." She frowned, confused, not knowing where this conversation was going. Lucas let out a nervous laugh and, before she could say anything, He pulled a small box out of his pocket. Time seemed to stop. Hayley's eyes widened, her heart beating hard as if trying to escape from her chest. Lucas knelt down in front of her. "Marry me." The shock was so great that she felt her legs wobble. "What?" Her voice came out almost inaudible. "Hayley, I don't want another second of my life without you. I'd rather give up everything, even the hotel, than lose you." She felt her eyes fill with tears. "Lucas, you can't be serious. The hotel is your business." He held her hands tightly. "I have other hotels in other cities, other businesses, but there's only you." Hayley brought her hands to her face, trying to hold back the tears. "Lucas," he smiled, his eyes shining. "I can't even imagine losing you." Her heart squeezed, and in that moment all doubts vanished. She loved him, and now she was sure that he loved her more than anything. Lucas squeezed the ring between his fingers and asked again, this time with a voice full of emotion. "Will you marry me?" Hayley felt a lump in her throat and tried to speak, but her voice wouldn't come out. Then, without thinking twice, she threw herself into his arms and kissed him. Lucas laughed against her lips, holding her tight. Was that a yes? She nodded, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, 1,000 times yes. The people around them, who had previously been walking distractedly, began to notice the moment, and some even applauded. But for them, nothing existed but each other. When they finally pulled away, Lucas put the ring on her finger, and Hayley felt the weight of commitment, not obligation, but true love. "Now we need to work out how we're going to get everything running at the hotel," she said, drying her tears. Lucas picked up his cell phone and dialed a number. "Yes, Mark, I need a meeting with you and Hayley tomorrow. We have to decide who's going to take over the running of the Blue Haven." He hung up and looked at her. "That doesn't mean you won't be following everything anymore." Hayley nodded. "Yes, I want to help from afar, until I'm sure everything will be fine." Lucas held her face between his hands. "I always knew you were the right person to be by my side." The next day, the meeting was scheduled early. Lucas and Hayley met with Mark, the hotel's director of operations, and discussed every detail. "Hayley's supervisor is a great professional. She has already shown leadership and knows the sector well. I think she could take over," Lucas suggested. Hayley nodded. "She's always been fair and competent. I can train her myself in this transition period." Mark looked at them both and smiled. "I don't think I've ever seen a hotel owner and an employee work so well together. But Lucas, I can't say I'm surprised. You've chosen the right person." Lucas looked at Hayley, his eyes full of love. "I know." Everything was decided, and Hayley felt a huge sense of relief when she realized that Blue Haven was in good hands. As they left the hotel, Lucas took her hand and pulled her into a tight hug. "Now it's official. We're going to start our new life together." Hayley sighed, closing her eyes for a moment. "I can't wait." They walked down the street hand in hand, knowing that all their choices had led them there, and that, whatever happened, they would always choose each other. Time passed, and everything happened so naturally that it seemed as if fate had already written this story long before they met. Hayley transferred her college to New York, where she continued studying hotel management. But unlike before, now she no longer had to split her time between 3 jobs to make ends meet. Lucas ensured that she had all the support she needed to fulfill her dreams, without having to carry the weight of the world alone. But Hayley never just wanted to stay by his side as his wife. She wanted to grow, she wanted to build something with him, and that's exactly what happened. She started working at one of the Mitchell hotels in New York, learning every detail of management. Her experience at Blue Haven was essential for bringing in new ideas and improvements. Little by little, she became a reference in the chain, being recognized for her dedication and intelligence. Lucas felt prouder every day. And then, the big day arrived. The wedding took place in an elegant and intimate ceremony in New York, attended by close friends and family. Hayley wore a classic, delicate dress, while Lucas couldn't stop smiling when he saw her walking towards him. "I'm the luckiest man in the world," he whispered when she reached the altar. "And I'm the happiest woman," she replied, her eyes shining. They exchanged heartfelt vows, sealing the commitment that was already so clear between them. They weren't just a couple, they were partners. They were a team. The kiss sealed the marriage and applause filled the hall. The honeymoon was on an island paradise. But more than that, what really mattered was what came after. Lucas and Hayley built a life together, full of love, partnership, and fulfilled dreams. She finished college and over time took on more and more responsibilities within the Mitchell network. Her talent and dedication led her to a high-level position, and Lucas never doubted that it would happen. The years passed, but their love for each other never waned. They traveled the world together, worked side by side, and above all became an example that when two people truly love each other, they find a way to stay together, no matter the challenges. Because, in the end, they always chose each other. Now tell me, what city are you watching this story from? We want to know how far this love story has come. If you like the story, leave a like on the video and subscribe to support the channel. Take the opportunity to watch the story that's appearing on the screen. I'm sure you'll love it. Thanks and see you in the next video.